So it's Callum Newman here from the Daily Reckoning Australia, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to have Scott Rozelle on the line because he has written what I think is one of the most important books I can recall reading for a long time. I read a lot of business and economics books, and his one jumped out at me like there's no tomorrow. So I had to get him on the line to talk about it. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Callum. I really appreciate it.
Now, the reason I should say, the book you have written is called Invisible China, and we'll talk a little bit about that, or a lot about that actually as we go on. But first of all, can you tell us about the work you do that led to the book?
Well, uh, I've been studying China for almost, I hate to say it, almost 40 years. I visited rural China first in the early 1980s, and um, I did my PhD work there in the 80s, and I started at Stanford in 1990. And so all of it has been on rural China. I started the first 15, 20 years working on agriculture, and, agriculture, invested in agriculture, they raised incentives, they switched crops, and they raised 400 million people out of poverty. But then, I looked around in the mid 2000s, around 2005, and I kept asking rural people that we do a lot of in the field surveys and everything. We said, what do you guys want? And, they want everything, right? They want seeds, they want tractors, they want jobs. But the one thing everyone said was, we want our kids to have better education, because if they don't get educated, we aren't going to be part of this rising China. And since that time, I've really focused on rural education, health, and early childhood development.
Well, that's interesting because that brings us to what you call invisible China. So here in Australia, China is always a big topic of discussion because it's such an important trading partner. We, like the US, I gather, we view sort of China as this rising power, almost inevitably becoming number one just from sheer scale. Can you tell us, or paraphrase, or however you want to do it, what is invisible China?
Yeah, well, invisible China is pretty easy to define. It's rural China. Now, rural China, 60, 70% of the population is from rural China. That's 900 million people. 1/9 of the world's population, 1 out of 9 people live there. It's the people who work in the factories. It's the people who are building the construction sites. It's the old people, the elderly, and the children that are in the villages and are in migrant communities. But they're the part of China we don't see. It's not the Shenzhen, Beijing's, or Shanghai that show up on the CNN in the United States, or Australia news over there.
All right, so tell us now, you're flagging that this group is misunderstood, forgotten about. Why is it so important? Why are you bringing our attention to it?
Well, I mean, so that's a big question. That's sort of the heart of the book. But as a development economist, which is my area of study, what we know is that when a country is poor, like China was in the 80s, and they want to move to middle income, they need to mobilize people, move them off the farm into the factories, on the construction site. And China did this, without doubt, one of the most successful countries in the world are doing this. And how did they do that? Well, they built a lot of rural schools and taught these rural people how to read, how to write, and how to be self-disciplined. And boy, did they do well in those factories, right? I mean, that's, you guys send them all your coal and iron ore, and they send you back everything else that you consume, the manufactured goods, etc. Now, that's all fine and dandy until you get to be a middle income country. Right. And, once you hit that middle income level, start to push up towards upper middle income, right? Wages start to rise, and economies start to evolve, right? And what you see is, factory owners and manufacturers and construction sites. What do they start to do? They start to automate. They start to outsource, and gradually, what we've seen since 2015 in China is manufacturing jobs are falling, construction jobs are falling, and now, with the boom of China, there's lots of jobs in the high-tech sector, finance, medicine, academics. These jobs that the middle-income China, the 500 million people that are in the middle-income China want, but you need the skills to be able to do that. And most of these people from rural China, they don't even have a high school education. They're what we would call in Australia or the United States, we call them a high school dropout, right? And in China, a high school dropout wasn't a problem 25 years ago. It's a huge problem today because they aren't going to be able to enjoy the rise of society, and they're going to be polarized over off to the side, I think.
Well, it's funny. I put the book to the test in a little way on the weekend. You might laugh at this. So in the book, you talk about how you used to take people to Walmart, and everything was made in China, and now they don't. So I was shopping with my wife on the weekend, and we went to H&M, the big Swedish retail chain, and I just picked up one thing, which was like a wooden bowl, fruit bowl or something. I turned it over. It's made in India. And that's what you're talking about, isn't it? Those sort of things are shifting to Vietnam, India, Africa.
Guatemala, Peru, yes, Ethiopia. Yeah, you look at I can't show you on a podcast, but my jeans were made in China 5 years ago. They're made in Ethiopia now, right? And
so one of the things that jumps out of you when you read the book is that we all have this perception that the Chinese, Asian culture just venerates education and learning and all that type of thing. But you sort of come through like a steam train and say it's actually quite terrible in China for the rural population. And that's why they can't transition. When you go and talk to people, are they sort of stunned when you tell them this?
Well, when I put up, and I always tell them that China is the most undereducated country in the middle-income world, and it doesn't matter if I'm giving this at Tsinghua University, a Chamber of Commerce, or an NGO, meeting. People are stunned. They really are. And then they sort of think, well, where's that data from? And then I say, well, it's from this 1.3 billion person survey called the census, right? So this is what it is, right? And but I tell you what, it's not. It's not that these rural families don't want to have a good education. We do a lot of work with 0 to 3 early childhood development programs where moms have these babies and grandmas have the babies in their arms. What is it? 95% of them, when they say, "Where do you want your young baby to go?" 95% say, "I want him to go to college." Hey, 17% of them say they want to get a PhD. I tell them, don't get a PhD, an MBA, okay, but you'll be poor like me, right? Exactly. But it's not. It's the other thing. It's China's education system is one that's just like the U.S. It's very decentralized. There's 40,000 school districts in China. There's 40,000 school districts in the U.S., right? And we implement rural education in these local school districts, and the poor areas don't have any resources, and they can't attract good teachers, and they just can't provide a good education to the children. So the parents want their kids to have a good education, but they just don't get it. So it's very complicated, but it's a really supply side problem of education. The demand is there from rural people.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do a great job of explaining it throughout the book. But basically, what you're pointing out is China has this east coast that's a very profitable and rising access to education, and there's this left behind southern and western part that's going to cause a lot of problems. Now, part of that is this registration system that they have in China, which I keep reading about. I read a lot of books about China. It pops up all the time. Everybody flags it as an issue, but they don't seem to be able to get out of this straitjacket because it's too much money or it's caused too much disruption to change it. But at the same time, it's a long term time, not time bomb, but like a thing that they just, it's a nightmare. Put it that way. Can you explain the hukou system and why it's so problematic?
Well, time bomb's a nightmare. So I think both of your adjectives work. I really think so. But it's a nightmare that's hard to get out of. Basically, it's from the planning. It's a leftover remnant of the planning system. And China, for 30 years, tried to plan their economy, and they broke it into the planned economy, which was the urban areas and the heavy industries and everything that they built for 30 years in socialism. And then there was the unplanned economy, which were the rural areas. And and afterwards they, I mean, what happens in Mexico City, right? There's no limits on who can go where, and there's now 40 million people living in Mexico City, and China doesn't want that. And so they kept the hukou system, the household registration system. So if you're born in the city, you get city services and city benefits. And if you're born in the rural areas, you get rural benefits and rural Social Security, and they're very, very unequal. This is why I have one example of why it's not going to be easy to get away. There's a new paper by a team led in Western Ontario University by Terry Sickler, and she shows where of 65-year-olds in urban China, on average, they receive 3,500 yuan a month, $500 a month. It's not high by our standards, but it's high by China's standards. The same rural person in rural China, not at 65, at 70, gets $70 a month. 70 versus 3,500. So let's get rid of the hukou system. We either have to lower the urban pension system to rural rates. And do you remember when Russia lowered pensions by 10%? They had, and you don't shoot widows and elderly, right? They can march on the street with, or you can raise rural to urban, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And so it's a big problem.
Well, it's interesting. I know you don't touch so much on it in your book, but I have read elsewhere that the local areas in China, especially as I understand it, the rural ones, fund their budgets with land sales. And that, of course, can only run so long as well. So China has sort of like a big tax problem too, doesn't it? Where they don't really have the systems in place to appropriately or sustainably fund all these issues that they've got.
Okay, so think about it. So every local government funds themselves by land sales, exactly what you say. Remember, rural China is there's 3,000 counties. In the United States, there's 3,000 counties. So the same number of counties in China as the United States. There's 5 times more people in each county in China. But okay, in 2,500 of them, there's no demand for land. They have a few land sales, and now they're trying to urbanize 4th and 5th tier cities. So but the land is almost free. Okay, which means that these local governments have very little money in their hand. Okay, number one. Number two, they have to do everything with it. So they have to fund city services and rural education. Okay, so now let's go out and spend money on rural China, on rural education. And guess what? We've done some surveys, and I won't go into the details, but basically what we show is out of 100 rural kids who actually make it to high school and get through high school in these rural areas, remember only a small part of them do, but of the ones who get 7 out of 100 ever come back to the county. So we fund everybody to go to rural schools and they leave and never come back. Now China benefit, but the local county, the local government doesn't. So guess what? They don't fund rural. There's no revenue, and the revenue they do have, they don't spend on rural education.
So when we talk about the grand sweep of China in the last 20 years, and this played out in Australia, it was about the rural people moving to the cities, to build up Beijing and Shanghai and to work in the jobs. Is that process finished, or is that still going? Where does that sit in your eyes?
Sure. Well, there's still 200 million people that they don't move to the city. That's the thing. I mean, the workers go to the city, but because of the hukou system that we talked about before, they can't move their family there. So, and they can't buy a house there because they can't send their kids to school there, and they can't get health care there. Those are local services for urban people. So what they do is they come and work in the factories, or they come and work on the construction sites or in the service sector, and they leave their kids at home with their mom and dad, with grandma and grandpa. Or they stay in boarding schools, and there's almost 80 million left behind children. So these are kids that are growing up in the care of their grandparents, and they see their parents once a year.
I know, it's so brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, and this spring festival, they didn't even get to go back. So now it's once every 2 years because of COVID.
And so part of what you're saying is these jobs are starting to dry up. So these people that did go to the city are now going, well, I don't have an option anymore. What do I do? That's correct, right?
Right. And basically now there's a rise of demand for services, right? So nannies and delivery people on their bikes and on their motors, DoorDash or Uber Eats, China style, right? And landscapers, there is a demand for service, but that rise of demand for services is proceeding slower than the supply of workers, because you got laid off from factories, laid off workers from construction sites, new entrants and they can't go to this high skill sector. They can't go into venture capital or accounting firms or into the manage a hospital. They get dumped into this service sector, and the number of people being dumped into the service sector is going up faster than the demand for it. So guess what's happening to wages? Wages are falling. So for the first time in 20 years, wages haven't gone up anymore. They're actually, the growth rate and the overall rate is falling.
Is that in unskilled labor wage rate?
Yes. So this is unskilled informal labor, right? Yes. So that's good. Now in the skilled sector, it's still going up. So the people that we deal with.
Yeah.
So you're getting polarization, right?
So I saw you quoted in another book I read. It was called The Myth of Chinese Capitalism. I think that's I've forgotten the guy's name now, but and you sort of you said, if something's not done about all this, China's economy could collapse by 2030. Was there a reason you chose that date in particular, or that deadline?
Well, economists are very, very good at predicting and then forgetting they predicted. So I often I've studied China for you told the audience for 30 years, 40 years, and economists have been wrong over and over and over, right? After Tiananmen, China was going to collapse. The state-owned enterprise reform, 90 million people laid off their jobs. China was they boomed. How could they survive in WTO? And they boomed. All right, so
Yes.
what I try to say is it's possible China will collapse or stagnate. I mean, and you know, for the past 10 years, growth rates fallen. I mean, it's on a linear trend down. So stagnate or even have you guys. On the other hand, you know, they might prove us wrong again. Okay, and they might. Okay, so this is what I say to that. It's possible they could collapse, or it's possible they could stagnate if they don't do something about this world economy. And so what happens if we face potential disasters? What do? We go buy insurance, right? We insure ourselves against car accidents and home fires and et cetera, et cetera. What I try to tell my Chinese colleagues is, you may not have to totally believe with me, but think that there's a small probability I might buy insurance. And instead of paying an insurance company, I hate making insurance payments, right? But this insurance payment is, you're going to educate your kids. You're going to retrain rural workers who have been laid off. You're going to give them a social security system so they won't go into crime, or they won't, suffer the hardships of poverty again. And so that's what I think. So, and I'm old enough that I remember in high school, everybody thinking the Soviet Union was going to dominate the world and we should become socialists, right? And of course, and then when I was in grad school, what was it? It was Japan was going to dominate the world. We should learn from Japan, and Japan hasn't grown since 1993, right? And so has China made it? No way. I mean, I hope, if they're fair, if they join the world and become a good member of the community, I hope that they can continue to prosper. If they don't, it's not only going to be the rural people get hurt, there could be a lot of people get hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And very obviously, as we know, very important for Australia.
Yeah.
I just dropped down my head. It's funny that we've got you on today. I mentioned it to Noel before. I've got here, this is in the Australian paper today, that the Chinese leader Xi Jinping has declared the country's complete victory over extreme poverty. You see, one of these big risks is that this deal that everybody takes as accepted notion that the Chinese people were happy to go along with the Communist Party as long as tomorrow was better than yesterday for the children. Now, if they don't get this right, this is where you're saying this could cause a flashpoint, because you get social unrest when you get economic downturns. And you get this big split where the rural part of China goes, hang on a minute, this is just not fair now. Like, these guys on the coast get all these benefits that are all the money's over there. We're not going to stand for it anymore. And then that's when things can get really nasty. But yeah. Do you go along with what Xi Jinping's saying? Do you think was that propaganda?
No. I think, first of all, the poverty line is low, but I'm really happy they've solved poverty, and they've put a lot of effort into it. The problem is now 900 million people are low income. Right, and now China's trying to promote a new sort of demand-driven domestic economy, right? Instead of relying on Australia and France and Germany and the U.S. to buy all their products and drive growth, they want their own consumers to do so. The problem is, if you have 900 million low-income people who don't have good social services, if they earn an extra dollar, how much do they spend on consumption? Low, right? I mean, they save. They save for catastrophic illnesses. They save for retirement. And I just don't see how this system is going to go. And the Chinese realize this. In August, China, people follow China. Remember, Li Keqiang talked about the 600 million people, and he called them informal, informal labor, informal flea market sellers, right? People who, put their fruit stands out on the street and hawk, sell shoes and and he said, there's 600 million people that make 1,000 yen or less a month. I mean, that's low income.
Well, no,
right?
I saw it in this article today, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's 150 US dollars or thereabouts. 600 million people on 150 bucks a month.
That's right. And guess what? They have 300 million kids and elderly that they're taking care of. There's the 900 million. Right? And so this is not, and that's what they're going to live on. Now, what you got to realize is that exactly what you said, Colin, is that 5 years ago they were making $135, and 10 years ago they were making $90, and now they're making $150. So they keep saying, yeah, I see this, and their parents keep reminding them how poor they were when they were a baby, and so they've seen it rise, and they say, well, as long as it keeps rising, I'm okay with this, right? But what happens? We're starting to see the fall of wages now, and the difficulty of finding employment when the American dream, right? I mean, it's called the China dream, but in America, when over half, it's almost now up to 60-70% of America now aren't going to make more than their parent, they start to become disillusioned with America. And guess, look at everything that's happened over the past 4 years, right? And that's the same thing that's going to happen, I think, could happen in China, unless they go retrain those people and educate the young and get a good safety net under them, right? So at least they can stay at $150 a month. But as soon as you start going to 45 and 40 and 90, beware.
I mean, it's sort of, when you look at those figures, it's sort of rams home why you say China is not a superpower, in the sense of, like, the per capita income is still very, very low.
60, the per capita income is 60th in the world.
Yeah.
So they aren't there in per capita terms.
Now, interestingly, you talk about in the book, the old model was for them to generate jobs and things, was to build airports, roads, bridges, constructions. You feel like that's coming to the end of its useful life. Literally right here today, though, China appears, or supposedly, leading the world out of the COVID crunch. Here in Australia, the price of iron ore is signaling, strong demand because it's up over 150 US dollars. Do you feel that's still the case, that this construction kind of endless ghost cities and things is going to peter out?
Well, I mean, that there's certainly going to be continued construction, and China's exports are at an all-time high because so many other countries are shut down, right? And I think that we'll see the correction, I think, over the next couple of years. This is way beyond my area of expertise. I'm a development economist, not macro guy, but no, I think that, they've built all their roads. They've built all the high-speed rails. They have huge infrastructure in all the cities. There's going to be more construction, but it's not going to, the level of that construction is going to come down. And they're automating like crazy. Made in China 2025, had huge government support the factories because they saw wages rising. And they're automating, and so even if manufacturing continues, right, and they use your iron ore, we hope for Australia's sake, right, is employment's going to be down, right, and there's development is very, very complex. I'm only looking at a part of it, but I think it's a part that I call the invisible China, because it's the invisible part we haven't thought about.
Well, we have this thesis, and I'm really watching it now, where we go, okay, there's all these stresses on China, and they may or may not be able to deal with it. You mentioned in the book one signal of distress would be a rising crime rate. Are there other things that you watch to see sort of how the hypothesis is going against the real world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you look at wage rates, right? What is the wage of the informal economy? What is the share of people who are in jobs that are formal with benefits and they're regulated and they are part of the tax structure, and are they in the informal economy? And since 2005, there's been a huge rise of the informal sector. It's over 60% of the manufacturing, construction, and service sector jobs. I mean, 2/3 of 60% of China now works in this informal economy. Plus, you look at things like unemployment, and it's hard to gauge, right? Because as soon as you can't look at official statistics, because as soon as a rural worker is laid off his job, he's a farmer again, so he's not unemployed.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. All right. Well,
Yep.
well, that's funny because that you make a pointed comment at the beginning of the book about commentary on China in the West, and most of it's like some dude shooting his mouth off for attention, or talking down his ass because he's never been there. How do anyone like me? Where do we go for news on China? Who do we trust? What stats can you trust?
Well, can I make a pitch for the Stanford Center on China's Economy and Institutions?
Okay.
It's actually the only center that Stanford is starting this for the past year. And basically, we're starting on the premise that the empirical data-based understanding of China's economy and China's relation with the rest of the world is at an all-time low. And we drive ourselves on anecdotes, and the person who's talking about and oftentimes it's his own experience, and he's not lying, right? But it's that's supposed to characterize. This is the difference. When I was in grad school, 1985, height of the Cold War, the top 50 U.S. universities had 65 economists working full-time on China, all paid for by the federal government. All right. Today, the top 50 universities in the U.S. have 2 full-time economists working on China, not funded by the federal government. Okay. I mean, Australia has more economists working on China than the United States.
That seems insane.
Yeah, I know. And why? It's because, it's norms in the field, and it's we didn't feel China was Russia was a threat, but China was something to enjoy. And so I think that, we're trying to bring this center together to put this platform to collaborate with a lot of Australian economists, by the way, and really get this information public and give it to Washington and New York and Sydney and Melbourne, so people can make Canberra, so people can make better decisions.
All right. So just to conclude as such, I mean, is there anything you want to say, like to the audience as such, about to sum up or to point out, because you make the point that a healthy China is healthy for the world in lots of different ways, and it doesn't have to go down the path of China versus America, and because there's quite a bit of friction between Australia and China right now. I mean, they're putting the pressure on exports of ours in retaliation to what they consider to be, poor diplomacy from Australia's part. Do you see that? And of course, we've got the US trade war. Do you see that situation getting worse or better in terms of relations between China and the rest of the world?
Yeah, that's a political scientist question. No, but,
okay. You don't want to get in trouble with your colleagues.
No. I just don't know what I'm saying, right? It's a fair question. Let me there were two questions there. You know, I want China to boom, and I want rural China to stay intact and be part of the rise of China, because I know a lot of people there and I don't want them hurt. Two, you know, a thriving China is good for Australia. It's good for Canada. It's good for Europe. It's good for, you know, Asia, right? And a falling China, this is the political science question. You could see lots of things happening, nationalism replacing growth as a legitimacy tool, et cetera, et cetera. So you think about what that might mean, right? Okay, so that's number one. So what I often tell China, you know, so what should we do? I mean, I wish China would re-listen to Deng Xiaoping, keep a low profile, right? Don't do international diplomacy based on commercialism, right? You know, become a fair part of the. I mean, your economy has made it, so become part of this world economy and make it thrive. It's going to make you thrive, right? And then refocus your efforts, your policy efforts, instead of Belt and Road. How about on rural Belt and rural road, right? And that, you know, you solve your human capital problem, and it's a many level problem from babies up till, you know, laid off workers. You know, I think that, you know, let's just muddle through and let's grow at 3% a year for the next 20 years, and you've doubled your economy again. You're twice as big as the U.S. Right? So.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see how it goes. What's next for you? Are you going to do another book, or is it just more research and publications? And
no, if our group, we work with a lot of Chinese collaborators, and we publish a lot of papers. Papers with my collaborators are much easier to do than write books. This book, if it wasn't for, I should give Natalie lots and lots of credit. We worked together for 7 years, and then she turned and helped me write this book. And so thank you, Natalie. But no, I think it's human capital is what we're working on. And then the center that we're starting, we need to do trade, global supply chain, collaborate with Australians and Europeans to really get together to figure out where China's at and try to bring them back into the international community under a set of fair rules. It's not going to be easy.
Well, I thank you. I thank you again for writing the book. As I say, it is what I think is the most. I told my readers the most important idea of the year, I think. And I thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And I really look forward to seeing what you come up with in the next 12 months and beyond.
Thank you, Colin. I really appreciate it. Noel, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.